right, good afternoon. Thank you for coming, brave souls, coming back after the first test. I'm glad to have you back. Today we start Chapter 7, which is Classroom Management. Certainly that's an extremely important chapter. If you look at all of the reasons that teachers are fired from their jobs, the number one reason that teachers are fired is because they can't control the behavior of the students in their classrooms. And even for teachers who aren't fired, but for teachers who decide to leave the teaching profession after a number of years and go on to another profession, one of the major reasons they cite for leaving the profession is that the students' behavior drives them crazy and the kids get on their nerves and they can't control the behavior of the children in the classroom. So today we'll be talking about some alternative approaches to classroom management and some ideas that you may utilize in not only establishing a classroom management system that is effective for most of the students in your classroom most of the time, but also some strategies for dealing with individual students who do not exhibit pro-social and pro-academic behavior, even though you have a very good classroom management system in place. One of the things I find is that for teachers who are very good classroom managers, they have the tendency to say, well, I run my classroom this way, these are the rules, most of the children follow the expectations in the classroom, everybody's on task but Johnny, so what's wrong with Johnny? So one of the things I want you to think about today is no matter how wonderful your classroom management system is, it's not going to work for all of the children in your classroom all of the time. Either this year or next year or at some juncture you will have a student who really does not exhibit the level of pro-social and pro-academic behavior that you expect. And when that is the case, it may be occurring in spite of the fact that you have a really good classroom management system in place. Just because it works for all the kids in the classroom most of the time doesn't mean that there won't be an exception, and a student for whom this system just really doesn't resonate and he or she misbehaves in spite of the fact that you're really good in this area. Probably if I sample the entire group in here and ask you this question, who doesn't like chocolate? Is there anybody in here who doesn't like chocolate? Well, I guess in this particular class, maybe not, but usually in a group of 50 or 60 people, there will be somebody who doesn't like chocolate. Now that seems unlikely to those of us who love chocolate and will work hard for chocolate and reward ourselves with chocolate all the time. But have you ever known anyone who didn't like chocolate? I have a very close friend whose child just doesn't like chocolate. He will eat a vanilla cake or other kinds, but if it's chocolate, he's not interested. So what is reinforcing and motivating for most people doesn't always work for everybody. So you need to start looking at that child in your classroom who misbehaves. If you have a great system in place already, you need to start looking at that child who doesn't meet your behavioral expectations as that child who doesn't like chocolate. Even though your system is working for most of the children, it isn't working for this particular child at this particular point in time. And then you may want to start asking yourself some questions. Why? Why isn't this system meeting this child's need? And of course, as a focus topic for today, I'd like to ask you a question. And that question is, how many of you would like to have exactly what you want when you want it? Right. It's not a bad idea, right? Getting what you want when you want it. How do you feel about people who give you what you want? You like people who give you what you want, don't you? I mean, it's automatic for us. When we have a problem and we encounter someone and they say, aha, I can help you with that. Let me show you how this works. You immediately develop a fondness for that person. And you have a connection with that person. Because all of us want to have what we want. And we'll be talking more in a few minutes about theories of classroom behavior and why kids do what they do, but oftentimes they have goals in mind, and just like us, they want what they want. So the question becomes then, do you think you should give your students what they want? If you want what you want, and you like people who give you what you want, how do you feel about giving your students what they want? Brianna?
Yes, but to an extent. You don't want them to, if they want to hit people, you can't let them hit people, or you can't just give them whatever they want because then they may be spoiled or, this and that.
Well, certainly we would never provide a child with anything that wasn't good for him or was a detriment to the learning environment or was a detriment to somebody else. But most kids have pretty simple wants and needs. They want to be recognized, they want attention, they want approval. They want things that are pretty, they want to do things that are of interest to them. They want to exercise some control over their environment. Many of these things are basic human needs that all of us have, and we like it. We like to do what we want to do when we want to do it, and we like things that are of interest to us, and we like to be able to be empowered to get the things we want. But somehow we feel like when kids are misbehaving, they ought to be punished. There ought to be retribution for them not doing what we want them to do. We have lots of control issues as teachers, don't we? If you don't do what we want you to do and what the rules are, these things are gonna happen to you. And most of those consequences are very negative. So one of the things I want you to think about as we talk about classroom management today is how are some of the ways that we can improve kids' behavior by giving them what they really want. Because I think if you're honest with yourself, you know that you do better, you like the environment more, you like the people in the environment more. The world is a much better place for you if you're in a situation where people are giving you what you want or empowering you with the ability to get for yourself what you want. It's just natural that you like that environment better than you like going to the dentist, right? I'm glad I wasn't a dentist, aren't you? They don't have very much of an opportunity to make anybody happy. They just save your teeth. In any event, Chapter 7 is Improving Classroom Behavior and Social Skills, and it begins with a discussion of understanding children's behavior and trying to elucidate some of the goals of students' behavior for you. And this particular section of the book is evolves from work done by a fellow whose name is Rudolph Dreikurs, and he is an interesting fellow in his own right. He was really the very first person to attend to the fact that classroom behavior and motivation and so on and so forth is a factor that teachers need to consider. Back in the 60s, gosh, almost 50 years ago now, he wrote the very first book that I know of that addressed this topic about students' classroom behavior, and the name of that book was Psychology in the Schools. And he was the first person to allude to the fact that we really, as teachers, need to attend to children's psychological needs, and we need to organize and orchestrate our classrooms in ways that bring the children's behavior under our conscious control so they're cooperating with us in a learning environment rather than rebelling against that environment, and that pro-social behavior in learning situations is extremely important. Dreikurs was an interesting fellow too. He started out as a psychologist who trained under a theorist whose name was Alfred Adler, and Adler was really a contemporary of Freud, so he goes way, way back, but he took issue with Freud about psychoanalysis and some of the things that you read about in psychology books. And he was unique for people in education because he was really concerned with individual psychology. Most of the work that had been done in psychological theory and so on and so forth up to the time that Adler came along really addressed the issue of how most of us are the same. Piaget and Freud and people like theorists like that are interested in explaining how most people behave and evolve and what characteristics are exhibited by most people. What we do as a species that makes our behavior the same. If you'll think about Freud, he talks about developmental stages, and so does Piaget, and they believe that all children go through these stages cognitively, and as they evolve psychologically into complex adults, they all pass through the same developmental stages. So these theorists are interested in how we're all alike. But Adler was interested in a different referent. He was interested in how people are different. What causes you to behave in one way and her to behave in a way that's very different? What is it in your makeup or your environment or your thinking or your parentage that makes you you and makes her her? So he addressed issues like position in the family, for example, and was interested. How many of you are firstborn children? Ah, aggressive, aren't you? Huh? Yeah, oh, you like it? Yeah. Oh, you didn't like being the oldest? No, well, how many of you are youngest children? Oh, looky there, I've got all these babies back here on the same row. How many of you are poor, pitiful middle children? Always ignored and neglected, huh? How many of you are only children? Am I the only one? The only spoiled brat in here, huh? I can talk about only children then, since I'm the only one here. But in any event, I think that few of you would argue with the fact that your position in the family and the fact that you had brothers who were older or young, brothers and sisters who were older than you or younger than you or whatever, had a profound effect on you when you were growing up. And certainly it shapes our personality and the way we think about ourselves and the way we feel about ourselves and so forth. And this is an important construct for us in education, because when we're interested in classroom management, we're really interested in what makes the child misbehave that is not conforming to the expectations that we have in the classroom. Why is he not doing what all of the rest of the children are doing? So our approach to classroom management is somewhat Adlerian, in that we have to be interested in that child who's not brought under the stimulus control of the rules in our classroom, because he is the one that will ultimately drive you crazy, right? The other thing about Adler that made him unique, and particularly for the time, is that he took issue with the behaviorist who said that people behave because they are reinforced. In other words, the event that follows the behavior shapes the behavior. So if I behave in a certain way and good things happen to me, I continue to behave in that way. If I behave in a certain way and bad things happen to me, I don't behave that way anymore. That's sort of a behavioristic notion of our response to consequential events. That whatever happens, follows our behavior, really predicts the probability of whether or not that same behavior will occur again under similar circumstances, right? Adler says, that's not right. What really predicts how somebody will behave is an understanding of the goals of that behavior. It isn't what follows the behavior that causes somebody to act. It's what they think they're going to get out here that causes them to do what they do. He calls this teleology. That word is T-E-L-E, O-L-O-G-Y, teleology. I think he just made it up. You know, I kind of think maybe that's what makes psychologists famous, is making up new words, you know, that fit their own. Probably not, but it's my story and I'm sticking to it. Teleology, T-E-L-E-O-L-O-G-Y, teleology. Anyhow, his theory is that people watch other people and see how they behave to get what they need, and they think, I'm going to do that too because I'll get that myself. And in order to understand children's behavior, we need to know what the goal of their behavior is. And so when we encounter misbehavior in children in classrooms, we need to say to ourselves, what does that kid want to get? Why is he doing that? What payoff is he going to get for behaving in that particular way? And once we understand what the goal is in that behavior, then we are in a position to manipulate the environment in such a way that we can give children what they want. We can empower them to meet their goals without coercion. Do you see? And Dreikers elaborated on this to say that when children are in school, they really operate from 4 basic goal structures. They either behave or misbehave, as it were. The goal of all behavior, he believes, is either to get attention, to cover up inadequacy, to gain some measure of power or control over yourself, your situation, or other people, or to effect a measure of retribution for things that we feel, in ways in we feel which we've been wronged. And I used to think this was maybe an oversimplification of it, but you know, as I begin to reflect on the children that I've encountered, even children in very extreme measures, like in psychiatric hospitals and so on and so forth, I think that these 4 areas really go a long way toward explaining why it is that children do what they do. I think their goals are fairly simple. I don't think they usually have the goal of really wanting to beat somebody up, like Brianna said, you know, you can't let them go beating around on one another. But I don't think that's really their goal. I think their goal might be to effect a measure of revenge against something they think is wrong, or gain control over a situation in which they think they have no power. And there are lots of other socially acceptable ways that we can help children do that. For example, if your goal is to exert power over your environment, you can empower children through communicating with one another, through problem solving with one another, these kinds of things, rather than fighting with one another. So there are lots of structures that we can implement in a classroom to help kids achieve their goals in socially acceptable ways. Because as they struggle to try to meet their goals in inappropriate ways, we usually discover that they are acting out and disruptive and spoiling the learning environment in any number of ways. A major problem in schools is attention getting. Probably if you could eliminate all of the children in your classroom who misbehave in order to gain attention, you would go a long way to eliminating behavior management problems in your classroom. Why do you think kids do that? Why is it, do you think, kids misbehave to gain attention?
Because they're not getting it at home. They do not get the attention at home.
I don't know. Maybe they misbehave at home to get attention at home. But I think they misbehave at school to get attention because they're not getting it at school. What do we give kids attention for in school? We give them attention for making good grades. We give them attention for making the honor roll. We give them attention for answering questions correctly. We give them an attention for having the prettiest art project. But what happens to the kids who don't make the good grades and who don't make the honor roll and don't get the bumper sticker that says, my kid's an honor student at Lamar High School? What about those children? How do they get attention in the schools? Huh? Usually by acting out. You know, one theory holds that attention is a basic human need and people have to have it, just like food. So if you can't get it, you steal it, right? I think attention getting is much the same way with children. It's great if they can get it through appropriate channels, but if they can't, they're going to get it one way or another because they have to have it to survive. So if you have a child who's acting out, and if you have a child who blurts out every 5 minutes, teacher, 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 that child is getting attention inappropriately, right? Because you're saying, sit down, quit, wait your turn, I've told you, wait till I call on you. All of the attention that child gets is negative, isn't it? What could you do about it? What's the solution for that child? You better think of this. You'll have a whole classroom full of them here in a year or two.
You could give attention when they do something right, when they do stay in their seat or follow directions.
You can give them attention for doing something. Catch them being good. That's the catch them being good theory. And you can also create being good scenarios. You can say to that child, I'm fixing to ask some questions. If you'll remember to hold up your hand, I'll call on you. You can create situations where that student is getting attention. One of the most difficult things, salesmanship jobs that I have when I work with teachers who are having behavior problems, is to get them to pay attention to the children who desperately want it. If you will take the worst child in your class and move that child up to right beside your desk and give that child attention every few minutes, you'll turn that child's behavior around. But why do teachers not do that? Why do you think teachers don't do that? Huh?
They feel like they're rewarding maybe their bad behavior, or they just can't stand them.
Well, I do think that child gets on your nerves. You wake up today, you say, oh, I hope he's absent today. But of course they never are. You know, he's going to be there. He's never going to be absent. And then I think the other thing you said is a very valid point too. I think sometimes we think, he talks out all the time and until he's good, I'm not going to give him what I want. But sometimes being right is the booby prize when you're a teacher. You've got two choices with that child. You can either turn him around or you can put up with him the way he is. And the question that I ask you today is, can somebody turn you around quicker by giving you what you want or refusing to let you have what you want? Which person will you perform for? The person who helps you get what you want, or the person who's determined to see no matter how hard you try, you can't get what you want? Let me tell you something. Do you remember when you were a child and you misbehaved and your poor mother was trying to cook Christmas dinner and wrap all the packages and decorate the Christmas tree and take care of your brothers and sisters and go to the grocery store and hold down a full-time job and run a household, and all you had to do was misbehave? It's powerful, isn't it? You don't have that luxury of time anymore. Now you're going to be a teacher with 23 other kids to teach and lesson plans to make and lunch tickets to collect and hall duty and ancillaries and lesson plans to make out and everything else. And this one kid who has nothing to do all day but misbehave. So your choice is to fight that child, in which case he may well win, or to use your brain and say, how can I trick this child into being good? And I will submit to you today that your chances of tricking him into being good will be much better if you set up a scenario where you're the person who gives this child what he wants, rather than being the person who makes sure that he's punished because he's not doing what you want him to do. So, you know, being right sometimes is the booby prize. So that's one thing I want you to think about. What is the goal of this student's misbehavior? And how can I help him get that goal in a socially acceptable and pro-academic way? Because if you don't do that, you will often enter into the same antagonistic relationship with the child that he has had with other teachers and the school in general, and that has ultimately led to his lack of trust. One of the things teachers of older children have to cope with the most is the fact that students often have developed this antagonistic relationship with the school, and they have lost the trust factor that makes it so easy to connect with the child and sell them on the fact that you're really here to help them. Another factor in giving kids what they want is controlling the school environment so that you have a positive classroom atmosphere that enables you to implement a positive classroom environment and co-opt children into doing what you want them to do. When you find that you do in fact have a misbehavior, it's an important thing to get a handle on what that behavior is. We talked a little earlier in one of our guided practices about operational definitions of behavior, but certainly it's important when a child is misbehaving to get a handle on exactly what constitutes misbehavior and exactly what behavior you want him to work on. Because as unlikely as it may seem to you, kids really don't have a very clear understanding of their own human behavior. You know, they just sort of behave in reactive ways to what is going on around them. They really don't sit there and think to themselves, aha, I know how I can get her goat today. They are really much more reactive than that. So, and since they don't know exactly what they're doing, it's important for us to figure out exactly what they're doing so that we can get clear on what needs to be changed. And that is called operationally defining a behavior. It means that the teacher is able to describe the behavior with such accuracy that another person knows exactly what we're talking about. An example in your book is that we all kind of have a vague sense of what constitutes a bad attitude, that demeanor that tells you that a child really doesn't want to be here and really doesn't want to put forth any effort and isn't going to. But bad attitude is something that's hard to describe because it's an inference. We infer what constitutes a bad attitude from other things that we see. So it's very clear if a child doesn't come until late, he doesn't attempt to do his work, he lays his head on his desk and sleeps all day, he refuses to establish eye contact. These are things from which we infer a bad attitude. But in order to turn a behavior around and to elicit a positive attitude from a child, we need to know exactly what it is that we want him to do. What does a child say if you say to a child, you know, you have a bad attitude? What does the child say? No, I don't. I do not. If you say to a child, you were 10 minutes late today, there's not so much room for argument, is there? So it's important for us to talk about actual behaviors rather than inferences. And this certainly comes into play at an earlier time when we begin to use an observational recording system. Because once we decide what we want a child to be able to do, we want to be able to observe and record that system. I can't make this come on. I thought we turned this on.
It's acting up.
It certainly is. Technology. I really need, you know, I had. Huh? You think? Is it cold in here to you? I'm so hot I'm about to die. Drawing me a little picture and everything. Okay, thanks. Sorry. Okay, I guess we're still running, I don't know, but in any event, say you operationally define a behavior. This is usually called a target behavior, but say you have a child who's off task. That's certainly a teacher behavior that drives everybody crazy. The whole class is working at their seats on seat work or whatever, and one child's out there somewhere in La La Land. And we can certainly agree on what constitutes off task. A child is either focused on what he's doing or he isn't. It's a very observable behavior. And certainly a behavior that we want to increase for any number of reasons. First of all, being off task has an academic reciprocal. When a child is on task or working cooperatively or doing the opposite of off task, it's a pro-academic behavior. And so there isn't an opportunity for misbehavior. It's easy for us to say to a child, forget the off task. What I want you to do is work on your work. Because if a student is working on his work, he isn't out of his seat, he isn't off task, he isn't talking to his neighbor, he isn't throwing spitwads, he isn't demanding teacher attention. He's engaged in a pro-academic behavior that is clearly meets the expectation of the classroom. So off-task behavior might be a big issue for a child and one that we would want to work on. And one that we can easily measure. We can watch a child for a week and determine the extent to which he is off task, possibly during reading seat work, language arts seat work. That would be a time that we could monitor a child's behavior. And we might notice, for example, that on a given day, this child was off task 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times on Monday. And on Tuesday, we observed again, and he had to be directed 5 times on Tuesday. And so it might go throughout the week for Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Thursday and Friday. In any event, our pattern might look like that during our baseline phase, and we could see that this child was probably off task about an average of 5 times we had to redirect him during reading seat work over the course of a week. That's a lot, isn't it? Because all of the time that you're redirecting him, telling him to get back on task, you're losing teaching time and other time from other activities that could be infinitely more productive for you. So, what are we going to do about it? In that particular case, we call that event recording. We just monitored the number of times we told him to get back to work. We could confine that, and the events always are a function of time. If you say a child is off task 5 times, it's very important to note whether or not that occurred over 30 minutes or a week and a half. So if a child is off task 5 times in a week and a half, that might not be too bad. But if he's off task 5 times in 20 minutes, that's a lot. So our events, our frequencies, are always a function of time. Interval recording is another way that we look at this same sort of thing, but rather than counting every time it occurred, we just count whether or not it occurred. So you may check at a time during the interval and see if he's on task or off task. You lose data that way, but you don't spend so much time recording. Duration recording, on the other hand, is important for how long something lasts. You might observe how long he's off task. So you may look down and he's working at 5 after 10, but at 7 after 10 he's not working anymore, and at 15 after 10 he's still not working anymore. So you might we might record how many minutes occur in the interval that he's off task, or how long a tantrum occurs, or something like this. There's a number of ways that you can record data on children, but the point is to be able to describe the extent to which a misbehavior occurs. And you don't have to do this in a way that's particularly time consuming. There are lots of just tally marks and things like that that will give you a handle on how often a child is off task. Then say you decide you're going to do something about the fact that he's off task. Maybe you want to talk to him and say, gosh, you sure are not getting your work done in reading. I think it's because you're spending a lot of time out of your seat, sharpening your pencil, talking to your neighbor, doing this other thing. I wonder if I moved your desk right up here by me and you had fewer distractions, if you could stay on task and complete your reading assignment. Another way to handle that is just task completion. You could just say it's important for you to get your work done. It doesn't really matter how you structure it, whether you structure it as an interval, whether you structure it as a frequency. The important thing is that you get a measure of the extent to which the misbehavior occurs, and you make a commitment to address that misbehavior in some way that is different than you're doing now. Because if you don't do something different than you're doing now, it's not going to get any better in all probability. So you can decide your intervention may be to move him up here. Your intervention may be to give him free time after he finishes his reading seat work. It depends on what you think would be the most effective for him. You ought to get a feel after you work with children for a little bit. You know, he loves that computer. I bet if he had computer time, if I offered him computer time after he finished his work, that he would be more likely to do it. And if he were more motivated to do it, he might stay on task more. How do you feel about doing that? Is it fair? What if everybody wanted to do that? I think it'd be great. What if everybody got what they wanted? I had a student one time, and he taught a special ed class, and he had a girl who was a very, very poor reader. She didn't like to read. She wasn't motivated to read. She couldn't read very well, which is no doubt why she didn't like it and wasn't motivated to do it. But anyhow, this little girl was about, I'd say, 10 or 11 years old and very, very low in reading. So I sort of tricked him for this particular assignment. I tricked this guy into picking, the whole class, not just this student, but the whole class of teachers. I tricked them into picking their very worst kid, you know, the one that was driving in the crowd. I said, aha, that's the one we're going to work on this semester. So he picked this little girl, and I structured a reading program which went right back to just the first few words she knew, and practiced words and put them together for reading fluency, and anyway got her started on the right track for reading. And so he worked with her for about 6 weeks or 2 months, I guess, and at the end of that time she had just made this phenomenal gains in reading. I think she finally understood what fluent reading was like, you know, knowing, having great enough familiarity with the words that she could read them automatically, and then of course understand what they mean, because it took very little effort to call the names of the words after this long period of practicing them over and over. Anyhow, she caught on to reading, and she thought it was fun and was having a great time, and so his project was over. And I said, well, how did you feel about that project? And he said, oh, well, I thought it was really good. It was really successful, and she did a lot better in reading, and she really liked it. She wants to read all the time now. She's asking to take books home and everything. And I said, how wonderful. I said, how do you feel about it? He said, gosh, I don't know. Now the rest of my kids want to do that. And I thought how sad that is. You have the rest of your kids that want to do that, and you think that's a bad thing. See, I thought that was a wonderful thing. I think it's great if they're all motivated. If you can get everybody to do everything you wanted to do for 5 minutes on the computer, you're getting a bargain. If you can get everybody to do what you wanted to do because they're getting what they want to do, that's a bargain. So it doesn't really matter what your intervention is or how you measure your data, whether it's interval or event or recording or whatever. Some types are more appropriate to some behaviors and not to others. And then it depends on what your consequential event is going to be, whether or not you want to approach it from a duration or a frequency standpoint. But certainly you need to do something in your intervention phase that is different than what you're doing already. And you want to note whether or not your target behavior gets better over time. Because if it doesn't, that behavior will probably escalate. Another thing that's important in evaluating behavior is looking at, it's called ABC, doing an ABC chart or an ABC analysis. But looking at a misbehavior that occurs over and over and over and determining what the context of that behavior is. ABC stands for antecedent, behavior, and consequence. And of course this is a different theory than the one we were talking about earlier with Dreikers. But it is the notion that when you see a behavior occurring over and over and it's antisocial or anti-academic, it usually constitutes a problem for a child, and it usually occurs within a context. There's something that triggers that misbehavior. The misbehavior is specific and can be operationally defined, and there's a consequential event that is maintaining that behavior. And if you have a child, for example, who is fighting or who has tantrums or does these kinds of things, you can often observe that behavior in context and see what triggers the behavior and what maintains the behavior, what consequential events are reinforcing that behavior. And when you manipulate the antecedent event and the consequential events, you can often change the course of that behavior so that you are getting this kind of pattern down here, which ultimately results in the misbehavior going away. Now, when you describe this pattern to a child, you can do so from the other standpoint. You can measure number of tasks completed or minutes attending to task if you want to maintain a positive referent. When we are trying to eliminate behavior, one of the unfortunate things is that when we're trying to eliminate behavior, we're telling a child what not to do. And it's never enough in school to tell a child what not to do. That leaves you with, first of all, only one choice for behavior management, and that's punishment, because you want to decrease the behavior. It tells the child what not to do, but it doesn't tell the child what to do. And we know, and you know, just being a person yourself, the one thing you absolutely cannot do is nothing. I mean, when a person is required to do nothing, they fidget, they wiggle, they squirm, they think of things to do, they manufacture things to do. So it is important for us, instead of telling kids what not to do, tell children what to do, what constitutes prosocial behavior. Work without talking, finish your tasks, stay in your seat, that sort of thing. It communicates to children, and it allows us to establish this relationship that says before he hardly ever completed his tasks, now he's completing this many per day. So if we're trying to establish a behavior, we'll see a chart that goes the other way. But it's important for us to be able to assess what we've done with children's behavior and say to the child, you know, you used to not finish your tasks, and now you've finished this many, and that represents a great measure of success. It creates also an opportunity for us to give children the sense that they're meeting their goals, they're getting attention, they're getting recognition, they are empowered in their environment, they have a modicum of control over what happens to them in school. And this is frequently totally missing for kids who don't know how to meet the expectations, either the social or the scholastic expectations of their environments. Your book talks a long time about effective classroom management and creating a positive classroom atmosphere. And we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that students are much more likely to follow the directions, to work hard, to exhibit positive classroom behavior when they feel that they are wanted and appreciated by the teacher, and when they have an atmosphere in which the teacher projects the persona that expresses concern for them, caring for them, where the teacher is sincere and enthusiastic. I really think we use oftentimes sarcasm and ridicule for children. I still hear this in the schools, and it concerns me a great deal, because I think it gives children the feeling that you're really not on their team. And very few people are willing to work for someone who they don't feel has their best interest in heart. And so your salesmanship about yourself and your caring becomes a very important issue. And one way we can really exaggerate our caring for children and the notion that we are facilitators of their learning instead of sort of flak jacket and hip boot, you know, prison wardens, is by being careful about the way we intercede in misbehavior when it occurs. Shortly after the time that Drykers came around, Some people began to write really they worked with children in fairly intensive intervention settings like psychiatric hospitals and so on and so forth. Most of these people were from Michigan, and they had an approach to classroom management that was called the psychoeducational approach. And one of the things that they emphasized was the measures and means by which we intervene with misbehaviors, or how we handle the surface behavior of children that we encounter in school. Those small things, when kids are off task, when they talk out, when they demand attention inappropriately, and so on and so forth. These things become an important issue for us. And one of the things that they emphasized is that the most important thing about handling misbehavior is making sure you do it in as unobtrusive a way as is possible. First of all, when misbehavior occurs, one of the things that we want to do is stop that behavior. We want to stop it because, first of all, it's interfering with the child doing what he needs to do, and second of all, it's interfering with the other students doing what they're supposed to do, and in all probability it's interfering with what you are supposed to do. So when misbehavior occurs, it needs to be eliminated. But one of the things the psychoeducators point out is that we need to handle these misbehaviors as unobtrusively as possible, because when we intercede in a behavior, two things happen. First of all, we waste time doing it and take time off task. And second of all, we call a great deal of negative attention to that child. And of course, one of the things that we want to do is bring children around to a position in which their attention accrues to them for positive and pro-social and pro-academic behavior. We don't want to attend to them for behaving in negative ways that bring negative feedback and punishment and rejection and those sorts of things. So they have a system in which we intervene as little as possible and as early as possible, so that we can turn behavior around without bringing negative attention to a child. One of the ways we do that is making sure, in the first place, children know the rules and know exactly what is expected of them. Until kids know what is expected of them, until people in general have goals and know what is expected of them, there's a very low probability of your getting that. And it's certainly worthwhile to either have a visual stimulus cue of the rules, have that posted in your room, or draw the children's attention to that repeatedly so that everybody has a clear understanding of what is expected. It's also important that rules be positive, that we tell children what to do rather than what not to do. It's much better to tell children to keep your hands and feet to yourself than say don't hit. These kinds of things are important. Often we can involve children in writing rules, and so that they feel some ownership of the rules and some sense of what's going on. We know that praising children and ignoring misbehavior when possible is a more powerful change agent than punishment. Proximity control is often an important element. When you see children misbehaving, when you see they're getting off task, when you see you're losing kids, oftentimes when you put yourself in the vicinity of those students, your presence alone interrupts the misbehavior. You don't have to say a word, but they come around. I often teach this class in the Kiva, and when I do, there's a huge group of people in there, 100 or I don't know ever how many it holds. I mean, it's just a huge group of people. And sometimes students in the class start talking. And so I just move to that side of the room, and suddenly they don't talk anymore. I don't ever have to say, quit talking. My presence there reminds them, brings them back with the group and gets them back on task. And you can do the same sort of thing with young children and never break the stride of what's going on in your lecture. Your proximity alone brings them back. Sometimes we can talk to children. If you have a student who you know is a chronic misbehavior, you can say to the child, you know, I really need your help today. I want you to do this. Do you think you can do it? And you can extract a promise from them for better behavior by appealing to their values. If you're going to use reprimands, you need to do so judiciously. Negative feedback may be something you have to do. Say, gosh, I noticed you talking out today. But they need to be in the form of feedback rather than to a student, and they need to be covert rather than public humiliation. One thing you do not want students to do is to get hooked on negative feedback, because if you do, that's such a difficult thing for them to turn around. It's so much better to get them hooked on positive feedback. Sometimes it's important for us for teachers to validate students' feelings. It's okay to feel a certain way, but it may not be okay to act that way. And you can say to a child, are you having a bad day today? You know, I want to help you with that, but we need to do it while we're working. Or you can ask, what can I do? Is there something I can do? Well, I'll be glad to do that. Do you think after that you can sit down and go to work? These kinds of things are much more powerful than sending kids to the office and putting them in timeout and this, that, and the other. Now, I know that you all spend a lot of time in your classroom management class on more formal management systems. But I also find that students get to Quest 2 and they really are not very clear on what constitutes negative reinforcement, positive reinforcement, and punishment. And these things are really, really important for you to understand, not only for your exits, but also for you need to understand what occurs in a behavioral exchange. So when you encounter children, you will be in a position to say, when he behaves this way, I want to do this. I see teachers often really punishing the behavior they want to see. They don't intend to do this. It just happens as a result of a verbal exchange because teachers are not really clear on what constitutes consequential events like negative reinforcement and punishment and positive reinforcement. When we talk about positive reinforcement, we talk about following a behavior, a consequential event that follows the behavior that has a positive effect on the child. How do you know that something constitutes positive reinforcement? There's only one way to tell if something is positively reinforcing. How many of you all have had classroom management already? All right. Listen up here. How do you know if something constitutes positive reinforcement?
If the behavior that you desire is changing.
In what way? She said if the behavior you decide is changing. But what effect does positive, a reinforcement of any kind have on the operant behavior? Well, it continues. It increases. Yes. The way we know that reinforcement has occurred is that the operant behavior increases. So, if we say, if you work 5 math problems, I'll give you computer time, and the child works 5 math problems, we can assume that computer time reinforces completing math problems for that individual at this point in time. And he may be able to be willing to work 6 math problems and 7 math problems and 8 math problems and so on and so forth for 5 minutes computer time. And we can say when that happens that computer time positively reinforces completing math problems for this kid at this time. That's the only way we know that reinforcement has occurred. You may think that chocolate is wonderful. And so you say to him, if you complete your 5 math problems, I'll give you a Hershey bar. But no matter what you think about the reinforcing value of a Hershey bar, if it does not cause that child to complete 5 math problems, it doesn't reinforce math completing behavior in him at this time. There are lots of things that are positive. Let me ask you this question. How many of you like money? I know it. We're all prostitutes, aren't we? We're just negotiating the price. So I'm going to ask you. I'm going to leave a trail of money on my way back to the office. So I'm going to ask you, if I tell you that I'm dropping $100 on the ground, what will you do? Run as fast as you can, right? Knock each other down, probably. But you would definitely bend over and pick it up if you saw it, wouldn't you? So we know, how many of you would bend over and pick it up? The rest of you are liars. You'd all bend over and pick it up because you've already told me that money is reinforcing, haven't you? And bending over is not very effortful, is it? And $100 is quite a bit, right? What if I told you, what if I gave you the secret location of $100 and it was over on the other side of Calhoun, buried in a coffee can, and I told you where it was? How many of you would go over there and get it? Several of you would. Why would you not go get it?
Because I might get lost.
It's a lot of effort even for $100, right? So some of you would go get it for $100 and some of you wouldn't. What if it was $1,000? So she risked getting lost for $1,000, but maybe not $100. How many would do it for $50? Calhoun's not very far away. How many would do it for $10? Nobody had walked to Calhoun for $10. What if you were walking back to Farish Hall and you saw $10? What then? You'd pick it up. So $10 will reinforce picking up behavior, but not walking all the way to Calhoun behavior. Right? What if you were walking back to Farish Hall and there was a penny? You wouldn't even bend over and pick that up. I'm the only one that would. My children wouldn't pick it up either, but oh, I'd pick up that penny. I'll bend over for a penny. Yeah, I know it, but you wouldn't, would you? It's all money. It's all money. But there's a relationship, even though all money is pretty good to us, there's an extent to which we're willing to effort depending on the amount of money, right? How many of you buy lottery tickets? Why do you buy lottery tickets?
Because I hope I'm going to win.
You think you might win. Who doesn't ever buy a lottery ticket? Why not?
I can throw my money away on my own.
You just know you're not going to win it anyway. We're going to talk a little bit about that after the break. But the truth is, you really don't believe you're going to win, do you? See, she really thinks she might win. What does this have to do with kids in school? When you say to them, let me give you an example. I knew in the middle school, this principal had the most wonderful idea in the world. What she said was, she figured out these people who would come to her school and blow snow. And of course, nobody in this school had ever seen snow. So they were really, really excited about this. So she said, okay, next year, for everybody who passes everything, you're going to get to come to the snow day. Guess what happened?
Nobody passed.
Yes, a lot of people passed.
They didn't bring the snow.
No, they brought the snow. But the principal was very discouraged because a lot of people didn't buy the lottery ticket. Many of the same kids and most of the same kids who failed the year before also failed again. Not because they didn't want to go to the snow day, but because they really didn't believe that if they efforted, they would be eligible to win that reward. There were lots of things she could have done differently, in my opinion, that could have hooked some of the kids in. But I bring this up to you because I know, even though you won't answer the question, that you have classroom management and that you ought to know the difference between reinforcement and punishment. Reinforcement increases the probability that a behavior will occur, and punishment decreases the probability the behavior will occur. The good news is it's simple. It's that simple. The bad news is it's not really that simple, because an issue is just not as complex as saying, I like money. You might like money, but you'll bend over for $10, but you won't bend over for a penny. So you like it depending on what you have to do to get it. So one of the things that you have to keep in mind when you structure a reinforcement program for children is what kind of effort versus what kind of reward ratio are you offering them. How many of you like math? A few. You're probably pretty good at it. So if who's pretty good at algebra? Okay, 2 or 3 are pretty good at algebra. So say if I gave you an algebra worksheet and told you I'd give you $50 if you worked it for me, probably wouldn't be a big deal to you, would it? Who hates algebra and thinks it's the hardest stuff in the world? What if I offered you $50 for an algebra worksheet? No, thanks. You know, I'm the same way. If you told me that, you know, I could go outside and refinish furniture in August, I'd say, oh, that's not so bad. But if you told me I had to go outside and work in the yard in August, I'd say, no, thanks. So there's something about what we're requiring kids to do. You know, we're negotiating what we're willing to do for what price. And that's certainly characteristic of you as you enter your teaching profession. You're saying, I'm willing to do this amount for teacher pay. But you might not be willing to be a trial lawyer for that amount of money. You might not be willing to be a waitress for that amount of money, but you're willing to be a teacher for that amount of money. You might be willing to be something else for a greater or lesser sum, but you've agreed to engage in teacher behavior for this amount of money, and you think you can do it. That's the other thing. You see, many of these children who were offered the snow day didn't believe that no matter how hard they tried, they could go the whole semester without failing anything, because they had never passed everything. In their memorable past, they had never passed all their subjects. So if you're going to say to a child, if you pass your work, or you bring your grade up, or you do this or you do that, then you'll get this, you have to set up a structure in which they're going to be successful. Imagine what would have happened if the principal had have said, everybody who brings their grades up 10 points, everybody who either passes or bring your grades up 10 points. That might be something you could think you could do. Well, if you bring your 10 points every 6 weeks, you can participate in the snow day. She might have been able to get everybody passing by midterm, but not the first week of school. Or what if she had have said, everybody who passes gets to do the snow day, and this is what we're going to do to make sure you pass. We're going to assign you a study buddy. We're going to set up study halls so that there's always somebody to help you with it. We're going to have after school to help you get your homework and get it in on time. We're going to have a hotline. We're going to do these kinds of things, and we're going to monitor you on a daily basis, so that some help and structure was provided for the children who were failing. Most of the time, by the time kids are in junior high, they can, but they won't. They may not know they can, but they're usually capable of it. But they have decided long ago not to do it, and they don't really know that they can. It was so long ago they decided that. So we have to do, it's not just as simple as rewards and punishments. We have to manipulate the environment so there are the positive behavioral supports there to help them believe and be successful, believe they can be successful and actually be successful. And there has to be an appropriate ratio between the amount of effort we're requiring from students and the amount of rewards that we're offering for those efforts. Now, your book talks about a token economy. There are some wonderful token economies around. Teachers have a strange view of token economies. Some of them don't like them, think that punishment and reinforcement in general boils down to a system of bribery. I kind of like token reinforcement, and I really want to say to everybody who is opposed to token reinforcement, when you start teaching school, just send me your check. Because the truth is, we all engage in a system of bribery that says, I will do X amount of effort for X amount of money, as it were, when we join the workaday world. So I'm not sure that token economies aren't really good training for later life lessons. The truth is, I believe that most of us negotiate what amount of effort we're going to give for what amount of reward we're going to get. And I don't know that that's necessarily bad. It's wonderful to think that people get up and go to work every day just because they want to, and their careers are so fulfilling and their jobs are so challenging that it's a pleasure to go to work. But the truth is, I like my job. I like you all. I think you're pretty nice people. I have a pretty good time when I get here. I've got a nice boss, several trusty assistants. But the real reason I'm here, guess what? The real reason I'm here is because at the end of the month I'm going to get a paycheck. And I don't mind being here. Don't get me wrong, I like my job. It's a good job. But I'd just as soon be in Hawaii. In all honesty, if the pay's the same, I'll just go to the beach. Right? Don't you agree? So probably token economies are pretty good training for later life lessons. Empowering people to make decisions about what they're willing to do, the extent to which they're willing to effort for the amount of reward they're eligible to earn. So I personally don't have anything against token economies. There are some great programs if you want to send to investigate them, they're available. I'm not opposed really to any form of reinforcement that is effective and that is not harmful to children. I don't have that same feeling about punishment, however. I think punishment has very damning consequences on children. I don't think it gives them any useful information about how to behave. I don't think that any teacher needs to be taught how to punish anybody, so we minimize the impact of punishment in all of our independent practices and guided practices too. I go into schools and see that teachers are perfectly capable of punishing more than they need to without any university level instruction on the subject. And I would encourage you to entertain the notion that when you punish children, you really take yourself a step further removed from getting what you ultimately want, which is the cooperative behavior, pro-social and pro-academic behavior of students in your classroom. Nobody likes the person who punishes them. And nobody performs very well for people that they don't like very well. So I think it's important for us to minimize punishment and maximize reinforcement to affect the level of behavior we want and also the classroom environment that's pleasant for us to be in. So I'm going to stop right there and take a break. I'll see you in about 5 minutes.